Well, no, and you did it impromptu for me.
Yeah.
So.
Not normally mic'd. No. Close enough. So you can ask a bunch of silly questions?
From class.
Let's get Ben talking so then we can go get beer after. Because, we like that. And if you're, I have to mention this really quickly because in case there is anybody who is not of age, World of Beer is not going to check your ID at the door, but they very well could check your ID at the bar. It's kind of an honor system that we've created with them. So if you're not 21, just kind of be respectful and just order like a soda or a water or something. We want you to stick around for the round of beers. I'm not going to bother with who is 21 or not. Sometimes they check, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they already know you guys. So with that being said, it's just kind of an honor system thing. So, but soda, water, order it that way you can still hang out and network. Otherwise, because we buy the first round of whatever the heck we want. So, all right, Ben, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm Ben. I don't actually work at CloudSpace, even though I'm wearing a CloudSpace shirt. I work. I did. So I work at the Iron Yard, which is a 12-week boot camp downtown in Orlando. And basically, I have several students here tonight. So, so what we do is basically we create new entry-level developers in 12 weeks in various topics, so like front end or Rails, or in my case, mobile development. So, interestingly enough, we actually talked about this today in class. So hopefully I'll do a good job. So we're going to talk about CloudKit at CloudSpace. It's basically an introduction to Apple's backend as a service. So there's various solutions for that. There's things like Parse, or Firebase, or even Amazon S3 as a more general purpose solution. CloudKit was created by Apple last year at WWDC. It was announced, and basically it's a way for you to persist your objects that you might have in core data or that you just create in your app into the cloud. And so that way, even if the app gets deleted and reinstalled on your device, you can get the data back. And you can also then obviously share the data among users as well. So basically, first of all, what is CloudKit? It's a storage and retrieval of both public and private data. So it essentially stores dictionaries of key value information, key value pairs, the CK records. And ultimately, it's just a transport mechanism. It does not actually do any sort of automatic syncing. So as far as you might have in core data, you can turn those things into records, and you can send them up to CloudKit, to iCloud. And then when you get them back, there is no automatic, here's some stuff from CloudKit, just put it in my database if I don't already have it. That doesn't actually exist. You will still have to manage that, that sort of retrieval and then storage back in your local data store, whatever that is. So containers and databases and records. Basically how it works is that CloudKit has various containers, and the container is private to your app. So as you may know, in iOS, all apps are sandboxed, meaning that they basically, on the device, they have their own storage area and they cannot directly interact with other applications as far as like just going into somebody else's documents folder and grabbing files out of it. That's prevented for various reasons, security and privacy and stuff by Apple. And so the same thing is true on iCloud. There are containers that you can create, and they are specific to the app. So if I have an app and you have an app, we have our own containers on CloudKit, and they're separate. Each container has two databases, so it has a public database and a private database. The public database is global to the app. So if you build an app and you are accessing, reading and writing data to and from the public database, that would be data that anybody with your app could see, potentially. Whereas the private database is private to the iCloud user. So as long as the user of the phone is logged into their own iCloud account, when you access the private database from CloudKit, you're going to get back a special database that's just for that one user. And so you could store then private data that's maybe, I don't know, stuff that documents and to-do items and stuff that you wanted only that one user to have access to. whereas other information, maybe like game scores and other stuff that you might want to put in the public database and then make available to anybody who's using the app. So you could see like a leaderboard, right, of game scores. You could put that in the public database. So CK records, they are the basic structure of CloudKit. They're the basic body that you use to transport data back and forth. And so you can write CK records to both the public database and the private database if you do that separately. So if you have a record and you want to put it in both places, you have to write it twice. But that's the basic transport mechanism to create an entity of some kind and then store it in CloudKit or retrieve it back. So if you store it, you're going to create a record first and then send it up to CloudKit. And if you want to retrieve data, you're going to get back a list of records. And then you can take those record objects and you can do stuff with them. A CK record is essentially just a key value store, so it's basically just a dictionary. If you know how to use an NS dictionary, you pretty much know how to use a CK record. They're pretty much the same thing. And each key in the dictionary corresponds to a field. So if you imagine like a traditional database table, you're going to have columns along the top and rows along the going down. And so each column, each attribute is going to correspond to a field in a record. And so then when you want to pull a particular field out of that record, you would basically just do an object for key and then use that field name to pluck out that particular bit of information. Fields can store simple data, so like a number or a string or something like that. You can also store arbitrary data, so you can create an NS data, sort of a blob of bits, and store it in there like an image or something. You can also even reference other fields, so that allows you to create relationships between either fields in between records. So essentially, you can create a CloudKit database that essentially mirrors what you've got in core data, potentially, so that you could actually just say, sort of take the object graph that you have local, and you could persist it up to the cloud and then get it back and do your own syncing. So fetching data from iCloud, how do you do that? You use a CK query object, and that is sort of similar to how you would do a fetch request for core data or anything else. Basically, it's just a custom class that you create to actually go do the fetch. The cool thing is you just create the query and you execute it. As far as how it actually talks to Apple and all the actual networking that goes on, that all happens under the covers. You don't actually have to worry about that. It will just sort of take care of it for you. It is asynchronous, so it is something that you create a callback and you're going to use that callback to execute the results of whatever you get back. And there is no guarantee for how quickly data persists up to iCloud or how quickly you get it back, because of obviously the network is lossy, right? You can be in a situation where you don't have a good network connection, and so you could either have a slow connection that takes a while to get the information back, or even if the connection is down or goes down during that process, you could lose the connection altogether. You can also do, beyond simple CK queries, you can also do something called a CK subscription, and that allows you to subscribe to, it's sort of like a query, but it allows you to subscribe to changes that might occur to your data on iCloud. So on the remote end, you can say, whenever this particular thing changes about my data, I want to know about that. And so you can subscribe to that as the app, and then what will happen is that Apple will send you a push notification to the app and say, hey, this data was updated or this data was changed based on the parameters you've put in the subscription, and then you can sort of do something with that, right? So next thing is a quick demo. So this app's called Picket. We're going to take a look at this real quick. Make this nice and big. I thought I made this. It already is. So let's see. That's about as big as we'll get it for now. So essentially what we've got here is a pretty simple app. This actually doesn't even have a storyboard. It's all in code. So pretty simple. If we look at the app delegate, we can see, if you guys have ever done this before, you basically just going to create a push pins view controller and stick it in navigation controller and then put it on the screen. The pins view controller is our main view controller for the app. We've got some things like we've got a map view, we've got a location manager to get our current location, whatever that is. We have an array here of pick marks, which is going to be little pins on the map. We have a container and a database. So the container is going to be the container for CloudKit, and so we just basically instantiate a CK container object in that variable, and then we can access that container. And we do that down here by just basically calling default container. So that's the other cool thing, is if you're just going to use the default stuff, you can basically sort of alloc init it that way with that convenience method, and it'll go fetch the appropriate container. Once we have that, the container object, and we can ask it for the public cloud database. There are two. There's a public cloud database and a private cloud database. Obviously, you get a handle to one or the other or both if you want to read and write to either one. So we're only going to be working with the public database, so we only need a handle to that. Once we do that, we set up a couple of navigation items, so a left and right bar button item to basically handle adding new pins to our map and also to refresh the map afterwards. And sort of the operative stuff here, so feel free, I'm going to post this on GitHub, so feel free to look through it if you'd like later. A lot of this kind of stuff is just sort of the standard location manager stuff to go get the current location. The parts that we care about for CloudKit today are basically going to be refreshing the pick marks. So essentially it's a map of your local location with a little bit of buffer around that. And when you press plus on the button, it's going to bring up an opportunity for you to take a picture. And when you take the picture, it's actually going to pin that picture to the map, to wherever you currently are. And then it's going to take that information, the location in the picture, that kind of stuff, send it up to CloudKit into a record, and then allow you to pull it back down. So we're doing it all in the public database. So the idea would be you could use this app, many people could use the app, and if you take pictures in a particular location, everyone could see the pictures as long as they were actually in the location where they were taken. So this is the refresh pick mark. So basically this is how we're going to go fetch data from CloudKit. So one cool thing we can do is, since we have a location object in our CloudKit record, we can actually ask it to not only give us all pins, right? Because what if there's a million of them around the world? We don't want all of them. We only want sort of the ones that are relevant to our user, and that's going to be ones that are geographically close to where they currently are. So we create a query object, and we tell it we want to go ahead and get a bunch of pick mark objects, which is the name of our record, and then we can use a predicate to basically filter down those pick marks into a smaller set. And so by doing that, we say distance to location from location, and allows us to fetch the location field from our record. And then we can use our current location and a radius. So we can basically say, I want from my current location and a radius around that, sort of draw me a circle around me. And then if there are any pick marks that are inside that circle, give them back to me from CloudKit. Go fetch them from CloudKit and bring them down. If there are ones that are outside the circle, I don't care about them. I don't need them. That would be needless network I/O that I may not be able to afford because my connection isn't good enough. So it just sort of limits that. And that's one of the tenets of CloudKit. If you watch I'd recommend, if you're interested, watch the WWDC video. It's free on the developer website. And then one of the things they go into is sort of, don't just use it as a way to just dump a whole bunch of data in CloudKit and then pull it all back out every time. Be smart about your fetching so that you're only sort of fetching the data that you actually need. So once we get that query, we're just going to run the query. So we say public database, perform the query. We feed it the query object, and we have then a completion handler to handle what happens when we get it back. Because like I said, it is asynchronous. It's a network call. We can't be guaranteed when we're going to get the information back. It probably will be quickly, but maybe not. And so we want to run basically a block so that we can run that whenever we get the information back. So essentially what we're doing is we're just removing the annotations from the screen so we get a clear, fresh map. Then we're removing all of our objects from our pick marks array. And then we're iterating over each of our CK records, and we're turning them back into pick marks. So that's the thing. Another thing is you're always going to get back CK records. That's the object type they're always going to be. So if you need them to be in some other format to use them locally in your app, you have to sort of deserialize them out of the CK record and put them into your custom model. So we have a custom model object called pickmark. And so essentially this alloc init right here just takes the record and just turns it back into a pickmark, which is essentially a location, a title, and an image. And so once we have that, we can then add that back into our pickmarks array. And so it's going to iterate over each of our records, however many there are. Going to create a bunch of pickmark, put them in our array. And then lastly, those are all also annotations. So they actually conform to the MK annotation protocol, which we learned about a couple minutes ago. A protocol basically is a more generic form for a delegate. And it's just basically a contract that if you sign up to conform to a protocol, you sign up to implement any required methods of that protocol. So the annotation protocol has a bunch of optional methods, actually a couple required and a bunch of optional ones that we have to implement. So we go ahead and do that in our pickmark class. And so since we've done that, we can actually just use those pickmark objects. We can feed them directly to the map view and say, here's a bunch of annotations, basically little pins. I want you to put them on the screen, put them in the map. That's what we're doing there. The other sort of operative thing that we're doing, this is all just sort of location stuff, is when we want to create a brand new CK record and send it up to CloudKit. So this is a image picker controller did finish picking media with info. So essentially when you use the camera and you take a picture, this method will be called on your view controller whenever that is finished, right? Once they have actually taken the picture and saved it, it will cause this method to fire, and you'll get back the image, and you can use it in your view controller in whatever way you see fit. You can store it in core data, you can put it on the screen, you can just drop it on the floor, whatever you want to do. So essentially, that's what we're doing here. We're just basically creating a pickmark object, and we're going through kind of the same stuff. We're adding it to our pickmarks array, and we're putting it on the map. Additionally, what we're going to do is we're going to store it in CloudKit. We're going to store it in iCloud. So we're going to create a CK record right here of type pickmark. And then we're going to set the various fields of our record. And then we're going to do, on the public DB, save record. So what that does is we give it the record and we say save record. And then it opportunistically goes and talks to iCloud and sends it up whenever it needs to. In fact, today in class, when we were all doing it, some people were able to save the information and see it immediately. And some people, it actually took a couple minutes for it to come up and actually show up in the dashboard. So that is something that is handled by sort of iOS under the sheets. And you don't have to really worry about it too much. So that's what we're doing here, is we're just basically taking our pickmark object and then serializing it into a record and then storing it in the cloud. So I can really only run it on my phone because it doesn't work very well in the simulator. You have to be logged into iCloud for it to work properly, and I'm not on here. So I ran it earlier. And so this is the CloudKit dashboard. And so this is pretty cool. It's basically the web interface that allows you to see your database in the cloud. So we have, in this case, you always get a user's record, which you can't delete. But you also can create your own record. So I created a record called pickmark. So it's the same exact structure as the local model object that I have in my app. Right? I'm basically just creating a clone of that object, but as a record in CloudKit. So I called it pickmark, and it has the same exact attributes. It has a title, it has a location, and it has an image. And if we look at the code, you'll see essentially the same situation. We have a location, we have an image, and we have an identifier. Using identifier as title, it's essentially the same thing. So what you want to do in CloudKit is you basically want to create a bunch of records for whatever you want to save. In my case, I want them to be sort of a one-to-one relationship, right? So whatever I create in locally, I want to then persist it up to the cloud, and I want to persist the same information. So I'm creating a pickmark object and then just setting the fields to be essentially the same thing. So title is a string, location is actually a location object, and image is an asset because it's essentially binary data. So if we look over here in our user records, not that one, sorry, that's users, default zone, we can see earlier I created a couple of pickmarks. Actually, on the way here, I opened the app while I was driving, and I just clicked a couple of buttons and had to take a picture. So there are various pins that I created and then that I persisted. So that save record that we looked at a second ago, that's what this is doing, basically. It's sending that record up to CloudKit and storing it. And since we put it into our public database, anybody else who has the app would then see these pickmarks. So if you all had the app on your phones, you could run the app and you could say refresh the information. It will go to CloudKit, and assuming that these pictures were taken near here, it would then show them to you on the map because they were taken in the same sort of general vicinity as where you currently are. So that's sort of a quick whirlwind tour of CloudKit. That's my Twitter and my GitHub, and also that's the Iron Yards Orlando page if you're interested to learn more about what we do. So there we are, CloudKit. Questions? Yeah.
Let's say you had an app that saves your average location in CloudKit. If I wanted, well, it saves a bunch of locations in CloudKit. Everybody's uploading their location. If you wanted to get the average of all those people, you would have to download all that information into the phone to get that logic? Or
What do you mean by average?
Well, in order for you to get the average of everybody's location, you have to have everybody's location.
Right.
And then you have to do the logic to get the average. So do you have to bring down everybody's location to do the logic? You
could potentially use a predicate to filter it at least partially. It depends on exactly what you're trying to do, but the predicates are pretty powerful. You can definitely do a lot in that to filter it down to a smaller group than just sort of everybody in the database. As far as specifically exactly what you're trying to do, I'm not sure, but you can filter it. Like in this case, I could have just gotten every single pin, right? And then in the app, I could have determined, okay, well, which pins are near me. But one of the things they anticipated that to be a potential issue, especially with location, if you're storing a location in CloudKit. And so they added this custom additional predicate method that they didn't have before to allow you to filter the location based on any given location that you feed it, like in this case it's going to be the current location, and the locations that are in all of the CloudKit records, and say, only show me the ones that are in range, right? So they did anticipate that as a possibility. I don't know if they could do exactly what you're asking, but potentially.
Couple questions. One, what would be the best practice to handle if you didn't have connectivity at the time? Is there a way to store, say, for example, data locally and then?
Yeah, so if you were going to create data locally and then you wanted to send it to iCloud, to CloudKit, right? You could store it in core data, so you could store it locally, and then that way it would persist forever, right? And so then every time the app got relaunched, you could say, hey, I've got these pending transactions that haven't gone to CloudKit yet. Try again, and if that didn't work, just keep trying until eventually it works, right? So the one thing that this does not do is there is no connection, no formal connection between core data and CloudKit, as far as nothing happens automatically. There's no syncing of like, oh, I have records here, just send them automatically whenever you have time. You have to have logic to manage that, but you certainly could store them locally. As far as the other way, if you want to pull records down, nothing you can do until you have a connection, right? So.
Right. And my other quick question was, like, for data, is there a way to reference or have an object relationship via field in CloudKit? So can I say, for example, if I have an employee table in CloudKit and I want to have a department object relationship, can I do that in CloudKit? Say
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, it looks like, I've used it basically just for this, but it looks like you can essentially more or less duplicate the object graph you create in core data, more or less anything you can do in core data. You can also, you'll have to do it as a separate setup step in CloudKit, but you can create that same set of connections in those same kind of fields. Yep.
Now, you brought up a good point about how you had to sign to iCloud on your iPhone.
Yep.
But I imagine CloudKit's also usable for Cocoa development as well, right?
Yes, so this is obviously not Android or Windows or some other non-Apple controlled system, but any system that Apple controls, so that basically is iPhone, iPad, and also the Mac. So if you had a Mac app and an iOS app, you could use CloudKit in both cases. There are Cocoa frameworks that you can bring into your Cocoa app, and you can do essentially all the same stuff. Brandon, yeah.
So kind of like parse, just iterate on what he. So there's no caching mode at all inside of this if it goes offline. Say in the middle of a call you lose connection.
Right.
Like in parse you could say return to me the newest objects or the cached objects
Right.
or something along those lines.
I don't think so. I didn't see anything like that, so yeah.
Pretty much just give you an error back and you have to handle it.
Yeah, and then you'd have to, right, you have to figure out, okay, well, which ones went and which ones, and then next
The other
time.
question, I think I heard that this isn't available, but running scripts on the server side, they have no scripting abilities or anything like that. If you want to do it, you have to write a Mac app.
Right, that's the other thing that is a little bit unfortunate. There doesn't appear to be any way to run custom scripts, and the other thing that's not great is you can actually, in here, if we go into, so we're looking at the pickmark record, and so we have the pickmark records that were created by the app. You can also create your own. It's on the server side. You can just hit plus, and I can create a brand new pickmark object in the cloud, and then if it's set up to do that, the next time the app runs, it'll download the app. So you could actually seed your app with data by putting the data here first, and then the first time the person installs the app on their phone, it'll bring that information in. The downside is, depending on how many fields you have to fill everything out manually. So there isn't even a way for you to say, here's a CSV file of a bunch of data that conforms to a particular format. I want you to use this to create a bunch of records. It doesn't exist, at least not yet.
There's no import option.
There's no import option. So if you want to do like sort of cloud first data seeding, you have to do that one record at a time by hand.
So when you import the records, do they have an object name association?
Say it again.
So the place mark or the CK records objects, they're dictionary.
Yeah, they're essentially just a dictionary. Yeah.
Do they have anything inside them that specifies what type of table they are, and anything that specifies the type of objects or type of table?
Well, I mean, so each of the fields in the record would have a type, right? It would be like location or string or whatever. But other than that, no, they don't. They don't really understand. I mean, and they would know their record type, right? So like I created a record called pickmark, and so you could query the record and you could say what kind of record are you, and it could tell you that.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Like when you actually get the object back, is there a property?
Yeah. So if you don't know what they are, right, then you could ask it. You could do introspection, and it would tell you. But generally, that's probably not going to be a problem because when you do the fetch request itself, you have to specify what kind of record you want to get back. So you probably will know what it is, but on the off chance you don't, you can ask it. Yep.
So a question is, so basically what you suggested is the best way to handle connectivity issues would be just test for connectivity in the first place.
Yeah.
If it's available, then
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, if you're concerned about that, then just do a general network connectivity check first, and then if that works, then you can say you can run your save record. I mean, it will handle it in the save record. Let me look here. So down here, you can see in our save record call, we provide a completion handler, and it comes back with a record object and also with an error. So if it was successful, it'll give you back a populated record variable, and if it was an error, the error would actually point to an error object, and then you could look at that and see what's going on in there. Yep. So you could just sort of handle it that way, sort of in a lazy way, or you could proactively check first and then do it. Yep. Anything else? Okay, thanks. Swift? Yes. It's fully compatible with Objective-C and Swift.